So Damon, we've talked about the flow triggers. We've talked about, honing your zone. I think one of the things that, what keeps us off our game. And again, we're trying to help people understand what those cues are in their environment that lets them into it. But I think it's also important to recognize what will pull us out of it. And again, where we do have maybe some more autonomy in those areas. So let's move into the flow blockers as a way to give people some insight. So when we talk about distraction, I mean, again, the world is distracting. How do we talk about this and bring it into the now, into the moment, into this 30-day practice, this idea of distraction?
Well, our course goes through presence, connection, and then choice. And I want to stop at choice for a minute. We all have probably multiple tabs open on our computer at all times. We have our phone sitting next to us. We have colleagues, open floor offices. And then, we have 1,000 channels on our TV. There's a million different things that we can be distracted by. But the number one thing that we get distracted by is our own selves, our own thoughts. And so to me, the first place that we need to look is formulating a plan to be able to recognize where the distraction is coming from. And that's where when you speak of autonomy and some control, we have control over what it is that we're paying attention to. So we'll give you some tips, some pretty low level offline tips that you can use in your day-to-day life. But just know that distraction is the kryptonite for flow, and that it's a really difficult one for most of us to mitigate because it's so all pervasive in our lives. But the one that I really want to highlight is the fact that we have, some upwards of 60, 80,000 thoughts a day. And we have a tendency as humans to take the bait quite often. So some of the distraction is happening within our own body and within our own brain. And so becoming more mindful of what's pulling us away from the present moment can be a really powerful way. But in the interim, understand that distraction is a real blocker and it's something that's going to keep us out of flow.
Right. Again, I same similar to interruptions then, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, interruptions is a big one. And, I have a client, they have an open floor plan in their office and they all have these little Star Wars action figures sitting on their desk. And the reason for them is when they don't want to be interrupted, all they do is they knock Yoda over. And so if I'm walking by your desk and I see that Yoda is laying face down, that's my cue to leave you alone. So interruption is something that happens to us all the time. And yet there are some ways that we can kind of create some structure around being able to not have to articulate that, hey, please be quiet. I need to be really focused right now. So I just want to plant the seed that interruption is also something that's going to keep us out of flow, but let's see if we can create some ways to solve the problem a little bit.
Yeah, my strategy in both these and distraction interruptions, I've taken all the notifications off of my phone. So I don't know when I have a text, a phone number, an email. And so again, it allows me, it also pisses people off because like, how come you're not calling me back? It's like, because I don't know that you've called. But yeah. What it does do, and I think to your point, you have to kind of almost recalibrate some of your social contracts with people. Again, we're responding to other people's expectations versus setting ourselves up to be our best, to perform our best so that we can show up for those people when they need us the most. So
that's right.
Can I speak to this one? This one is a big one for me. I'm a cancer survivor. I had cancer several years ago. And one of the things around this one, it's kind of related to the distraction, but there's something called metacognition. It's our brain's ability to think about what it's thinking about. And so for me, the flow blocker and the lesson that I learned was when I first got diagnosed, I was freaking myself out. I'd have like a feeling in my body. I'm like, oh, there must be a tumor. And I was really getting agitated. And even though I study the brain, talking to my physician, he just said, when you start having that negative self-talk, just say cancel. Because we're the only species that can think ourselves into a tizzy, and we're the only species that can think ourselves out of a tizzy. And I just think for me, that muscle of saying, cancel that story in my head, it's not serving me right now, and then being able to change my attention to where I wanted to go. It wasn't an easy journey. I definitely struggled with it, but over the practice of my recovery, over the months that I was going through treatment, I definitely was in almost Zen land when I was even going through treatments. You know, I was like not letting, and I would start to envision my thoughts started to go, the medicine that's in my body is going to help heal me, you know? So I focused on the opposite versus I'm feeling that this is happening. I just was able to manage this one. So that metacognition is really what this is about for me. And I can't think of a better skill of just being able to pause that thought, cancel it, shrink it, and then focus on what is it that I want and how do I want to be in that moment. So this one to me is I think it's really, really difficult, but let's just capture those thoughts that aren't of service to us. So this one.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Scott. And, it's amazing that you were able to have that kind of discipline and composure to be able to, put that into practice. And there are lots of ways which, we'll be inserting some coaching throughout the month, but, whether you're sending it down the river, whether you're kind of placing it in an 80,000 person stadium, whether you're moving into a different room, our relationship with our own critical thoughts is one that we need to spend a little time and create and cultivate. In Scott's case, cancel those thoughts worked wonderfully. Some people need to speak with those thoughts and say, hey, I understand you're trying to help me, but I'm busy right now. I'll talk to you later.
Exactly.
So there are ways to, create a relationship where we're not bogged down in some of this negative self-talk and some of the critical things. We say things to ourselves we wouldn't say to anyone else. So, another thing that we want to unpack, probably in the next flow challenge is talking a little bit about self-compassion.
Yeah.
But for now, just understand that, that's not serving you to get stuck in that critical loop. And it's certainly not going to allow you to get into flow.
And I think that to me is not serving me. And I think it's also, is it in service to others? So I think that self-talk, especially in the world that we're in, it's easy to kind of be critical of others as well, but that is too a critical thought. So just recognizing the agitation that happens. So the two parameters for me in terms of my fence is it of service to me? Is it of service to others? Is it of service to my community? Has really been a good kind of another way I've framed this one. Multitasking. This one's a big one too. A lot of people say they can multitask. They just monotask. They switch really quickly. And some studies suggest on this one, like having your phone on in a meeting, for example, your brain still is attending to it. So literally turn off your phone. But these are new habits. A lot of people really struggle with this one. But multitasking is really difficult. People say, well, I can drive and I can talk. And I'd say, okay, well, go to a new part of your community or somewhere you've never driven and see if you can have the same conversation, because your brain needs to attend to that part of the road because you've never been on it before. So, to your point earlier around just making things habituated, the reason why we feel we can multitask is because we've got some of the things down to our just muscle memory. But now when we're in different environments and different contexts, you can't do it. It's really, I think, a real tax on our cognition for
right. And it's probably more in the boredom side of the challenge skills ratio as well.
True.
So
Yeah.
if we're going to push ourselves a little bit this month, we're going to need to be able to kind of stay on one task and really, mitigate some of the bandwidth that we lose by multitasking.
Absolutely. Dehydration. This one is a surprising for a lot of people. Speak a little bit about this one.
I mean, I think the most impactful stat and study is that when we're 2% dehydrated, which most of us are, we lose at least that much of cognitive capacity. So it's really difficult to make that draw a line between, being dehydrated and what's going on in our brain. But this is a really powerful one. It's one that we all have control over to some degree, and we'll be giving you some easy, actionable ways to be able to start to think a little bit more about your hydration and create ways that are kind of like low friction ways to be able to add more water into your day-to-day life. But 2% dehydrated, bringing your cognitive level down obviously is under the category of being a flow blocker.
Great. Lack of sleep. This one is a no-brainer, but a lot of people don't sleep very well.
Right, exactly. And you'll see the through line between, our earlier slide on recovery and lack of sleep. Lack of sleep. So there's definitely ways that we can create and engineer a proper sleep hygiene. Dark room, cool room. Off the social media, off the devices an hour before. And there's several more of those, but suffice it to say that if we're not sleeping well, if we're not recovering well, we're not going to be able to be engaged in taking that next best step.